What check game last night?
You've been close.
It's the ending. It was a great ending.
I was hoping there were gonna be a great ending. Actually, I'm not 30 minutes sleep. But then got the rest schedule in the morning, 2 tomorrow. So I got a few of shit. And then it's late. And it's trying to sleep on my birthday, so sorry. I went to sleep early last night. It was 4 a.m. Ligament.
Well, that's not good for this weekend.
No, I'm doing better, but.
That was some hit, but let's see.
I saw it later.
That, yeah, man, what a great. It's like, well, yeah, you guys said we did watch. Tuesday night's my only night I'm home.
What is Mary?
Yeah.
Who cares?
She's here. Don't worry, Mary is
I
here.
forgot to bring.
She's in the ladies' room for God's sake. Something, I'm gonna read her.
Promises, promises.
I know. How you doing?
Okay.
Good.
Yesterday, not so good. Today, good.
I know Mary tells me good and bad.
We are,
I'm not saying.
we are doing limited amounts. I don't think so. I think it's only, I think there's only going to be, no, there's only going to be the readings of the Torah. If you'd like to read the Torah, you can have an aliyah. Why? I know, well, it's next year. Karen Barnett is going to be reading the Torah. Hello, everybody. Can you hear us?
Yeah,
We're online. Hey, Harvey.
how are you?
Good. We can hear you.
Good.
Talk to Sharon. It sounded
Sharon,
like you said
wonderful.
shine. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Sharon is recovering well, but she did hurt her leg. Long way to go, but she's going to do it. Is she there with you, Harvey?
You here? Yeah. Hey, hi.
She's here. She can hear you.
Hello. Yeah, what's your name? You got my text, didn't you? Rabbi,
I got your text about,
how well I thought you did on both.
oh, thank you.
Yeah, they were, that was Monday, I mean, that Saturday was the best one I've ever. It was so much fun.
It was fun.
Just
We had a good time at High Holidays. We did.
more than- And I love when Rick Brody, I
I'm glad.
think he's very talented, they both are.
He is talented. He is talented. What's that? The prophets, yeah. Ezekiel. You got that? Where'd you get that from?
At the house of David,
Nice. You just get it or you just bought it?
just a few hours ago.
Good for you.
Before the final thing happened.
Good for you. Sheldon's showing me his Torah, there's a Tanakh he just got, his one he just got with the who's there? Who's DK? DK, who is that? Who are you? Who is it?
It's me. Hello.
Who is it?
Jessica's daughter.
Oh, hey, Danielle.
Hello.
I couldn't hear you.
No worries. I have a mic that
Happy
has
New
its
Year,
own like mute
Danielle.
option. Yes, Shana Tova, everyone.
Not Tova.
God forbid you wore long pants.
So it's good to have you back, but we've got, we have some people who are not here. Our friends from Texas are not here. We had, Joyce is not here. She's not feeling good.
She wants you to call it.
Who, me? After tonight, okay.
I'm
Well, that's gonna be late. All right, well, I'll put a note in. I'll call it. Well, it's good to have everybody here. I'm gonna make this little note here. And what else? We're in our first session of the new year. The things we read last week were interesting because
they actually made us think a little bit about politics, a little bit about dealing with punishments and especially idolatry. The week before, we actually looked at the holidays, the way they're listed in Deuteronomy. We noticed that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur aren't listed on it. Sukkot is, but not the other holidays that we celebrate in Tishrei. So that was a couple weeks ago, actually 3 weeks ago. And then this week, as we read next week, next couple weeks, we're going to be reading through the laws in Deuteronomy. Then it shifts to the last few chapters of Deuteronomy, which we're actually reading now. So like this week, we're reading Ha'azinu. Next week, the next weekend after that is Sukkot. We finish up with the last portions of V'zot HaBracha, and the last chapter. Yeah. So we're at the end of this. We're a little bit ahead of where we are right now, but right now we're reading what we read a couple weeks ago in Shoftim and Kiteitzei and Kitavot. Well, Kiteitzei, it's really where the laws are. It's really Re'eh, Shoftim, and Kiteitzei. It's like from like chapter 12 to like chapter 22. That's those 10 chapters or so are laws. And as I mentioned several times, they're kind of all over the place. There's not really like a probably, well, could be the end of October. So then what? There's always something to learn. No, we're working on it. It's going to be a surprise. No, it's not going to be a surprise. We'll give people about a month notice of what we're doing. But maybe I don't know. What are you asking me? Yeah, but I will tell you that as we finish up these last sections of Deuteronomy, it's kind of weird because we are definitely, this is what we're reading at the end of the year. And I've been thinking about it because I just read it, I was reading in the weekly Parsha. And so it's a little bit of like a time shift, but instead of like a few months ago or 6 months ago, it's like 2 weeks ago. So it's a deja vu feeling of like, wait a second, I just read this, but just a couple of weeks off. So this last weekend, we didn't have a Torah portion because it was Shabbat of Rosh Hashanah. So we read a special portion of Rosh Hashanah. So we didn't read Deuteronomy. The weekend after is going to be not this weekend, but the weekend after is Sukkot. So we read a special portion for Sukkot. So the way the portions kind of come up at the end of the year, it's if Shabbat happens, where the holiday and Shabbat coincides is this, then it's an obvious one. But Sukkot always changes. Sukkot always read a portion. Yeah, we always have that. But the way it happens this year, because Rosh Hashanah was on the weekend, took out the weekend portion.
So was it later then?
What? There's a double port. We did a double portion of Vayelech, Netzavim Vayelech, which doubles up that portion, and so it just kind of flows out that way.
When Simchat Torah is right after Shabbat?
It's not that it's weird, it's just that we end up reading that portion and the next day we're reading the next portion. The weirder thing for me this year actually has nothing to do with the Torah reading, just since you brought it up. This Sunday is the Kever Avot service that we do at the cemetery. And that's actually the morning of Yom Kippur, which is not ideal. It's not ideal for me, but
Or are you going to?
yeah, but it's not my, what can you do? I mean, it is. So if it's, a couple days before,
How long are you there for?
I don't know, it's going to be like an hour and a half, probably hour and a half. But anyways, that's the way it goes.
Last year they didn't, we went there last year. We used to have a rabbi walking around. And I didn't see that last year.
I don't know if they're doing that. That's a good question.
Not anymore.
I don't know. But yeah, anyway, so it's the way this year plays out. So we'll see. We'll see. It's interesting.
Be able to stand on it Sunday.
We'll see. I just told Mike, but John, I told him yesterday because I didn't feel it until after class yesterday. So I tore a hip flexor yesterday morning. I was exercising, I was working out, and I tore the hip flexor, and I knew it was bad. I heard it pop, but you know, I didn't feel it until I sat down for class yesterday morning, and then I got up and I was like, oh my God, I didn't tell anybody, but I basically couldn't get my leg back up. So that's how I knew it was bad, but it's fine. I mean, it's like I iced it all the rest of the day yesterday, and I iced it a lot today. Oh, no question. What? Thanks, Mike. What? There's nothing the doctor can do. I talked to some doctors. They said just ice it, and I'll have physical therapy if I have to afterwards, but anyways. Yeah. Stupid. It's not, I don't need pain management, thank God. Not yet. Need some cannabis. Drug to the class. We have a class of drug dealers. Yes, it's not a problem actually it's a problem in Santa Clarita, I guess. But anyways, so that being said, a lot going on. But the we started what? I could, but you know what? It's actually a little freer right now. Yeah, so I'm okay, but thanks. But that was a weird thing yesterday. Anyways. But that's why Mike asked if I could stand. It hurts more sitting than standing. Anyways. Yeah. So we are in chapter 18. And as I said, where do you break it? There's no sense. The thing that came before is really not connected. So it was more of a length, they came to about 20 verses and say, hey, let's break it here. But this section, chapter 18 is all still part of Shoftim. It's all part of that Torah portion. You'll see the first part, as we jump into it, it says the Kohanim and the Levim, it says the Levitical priests, which is interesting because it could have just said the Kohanim, the priests, and the Leviim, and the whole tribe of Levi, which is interesting because it's actually three different things. They only have it as two according to this translation, because they're saying that Kohanim HaLeviim are the Levi, or the Kohanim, who are part of the Levite tribe, and then they're saying the whole tribe of Levi. But the bottom line is, both of them have no territorial portion within Israel. They only live off of Adonai's offerings by fire as their portion, and shall have no portion among their brother tribes. Adonai is their portion as promised. This then shall be the priest due from the people. Everyone who offers a sacrifice, whether an ox or a sheep, must give the shoulder, the cheeks, and the stomach to the priest. The priest. Yeah, they won't do it. They won't do it, Mike. You're not a priest, you're a Levite anyway. Yeah.
I find it so hard to comprehend this specific so long ago.
Yeah, it's not only it's specific, it's not only specific, it is pretty clear that this was very important. Obviously, the priests themselves are the people who write this, so it's going to be very specific and very stringent. Yeah. So if Deuteronomy was written by the people we think wrote it, these are priests during the time of Jeremiah and Isaiah, and they're priests who want to protect their stuff. But they also are obviously protecting the Levites. They seem to really be protecting the Levites to some extent because they know that the Levites are also getting the short end of the stick. By the way, they're not letting them do their Levitical job anywhere except Jerusalem, which means that there are going to be a lot of Levites looking for work, looking for help. Why do the Levites? I would say there was definitely some corruption. We read about it in Kings, about how they're keeping the money and whether the money that they were collecting was really going towards what they were supposed to be going. We read about how that became an issue, but yeah, it ended up getting really corrupt when the money was just overwhelming and there were just not enough sacrifices to be done. I mean, they just couldn't do sacrifices for the amount of people. So, but yeah, by the time of the Maccabees, it gets to be pretty corrupt. But what's also interesting about by the time of the Maccabees is it says right here that the priests are not supposed to have any territorial portion within Israel, meaning they shouldn't have their own tribe. They don't have their own tribal portion. It does seem that later on they did own land. And definitely by the time of the Maccabees, they owned land.
Oh, yeah.
And they not only did they own land, they owned all of Jerusalem. They owned the property all around Jerusalem.
Really?
Yeah. But we read that, no, but we also read that even by the time of Jeremiah, even by the time they're writing this, while they don't have necessarily a territorial portion like the other tribes, in the sense that they don't have tribal territory, they definitely have a portion of land. They can own land. They have land, because we read about how Jeremiah buys this property in Anatot during the time of the destruction of Israel, in the sense that the story is there because it's showing his belief and hope and his confidence, full confidence that God's going to return the people. Because why else would he buy the property, secure this property for his family, unless he knew that they'd have that? We're going to secure this deed because we will come back. But why does he have a deed? It says right here, the priests don't own land. Well, they- And so was Ezekiel, and so was Isaiah. So all those prophets were already also priests. Now, it's not the same as having a territorial portion. It doesn't mean that they have territorial portion, but they do own land. So clearly, by the biblical time, by the time of Deuteronomy, there was already, well, I can't say for sure Deuteronomy, but by the time of Jeremiah, they owned land. So even though they didn't have a tribe, they had real estate. So they get these offerings, and you also give them the first fruits of your new grain and your wine and your oil and the first shearing of your sheep, which means the wool that the sheep have. The first shearing. For your God Adonai has chosen him and his descendants out of all your tribes to be in attendance for service in the name of Adonai for all time. If a Levite would go from any of the settlements throughout Israel where he's been residing to the place that Adonai has chosen, he may do so whenever he pleases.
Every time we see that, where they has chosen, that's Jerusalem.
That's Jerusalem. And what also is really interesting about this is it's telling us, as I just told you, the Levites who lived anywhere else outside of Israel, in Israel, outside of Jerusalem, they're coming to Jerusalem. The Bible just told us they're allowed to do that. Well, of course they're allowed to do it, because you've taken away their ability to have a shrine in their own backyard. So of course they're going to come to your place. So they're giving them permission to do what they want them to do, which is only come to Jerusalem. The Jerusalem priests who wrote this book, who wrote and are responsible for a lot of the Bible that we have their side of this, which is, hey, we told the people they could come and offer here. What we don't have, well, kind of do a little bit, because we have what they said about those people, is we have people that continue to say, we're going to offer sacrifices in our own backyard. We don't care that you're offering sacrifices in Jerusalem. We will continue to offer sacrifices in our own backyard. And we know that the people in Jerusalem look down on that and they don't like it, but we know that it's happening. And we also have to assume that,
We discussed that.
yeah, and we have to assume that those people didn't agree with these people. And they would have looked at this and say, this is just propaganda. You're just coming up with reasons for us to have to live in Jerusalem. We don't have to live in Jerusalem. And again, on another level, this is the arguments that we have between Washington, D.C. and the states, between Sacramento and everywhere else outside of Sacramento. Wherever you have a centralized government, people say, I don't care what you say. We're doing what we're going to do because it's good for us in our own backyard. So this is both a political and a religious issue. By the way, the Jews in these times, this was serious stuff. I mean, people did fight over this. When we read about the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom fighting, it's over this kind of issue. You know, it's not only this issue, but it's these kinds of, it's seeped over into the religious issues. Look, Catholics and Protestants were killing each other. Protestants and other Protestants were killing each other, oftentimes over these issues, which were kind of religious, but on the other hand, you know, they spill over into politics, and a lot of it has to do with who, you don't have the power to tell me what to do.
Clarification.
Yeah.
When did the Hebrew turn into Jews?
Well, from an academic level, we don't call the Jews Jews until after the Babylonian exile.
That's what I thought.
So until the kingdom of Judah. But we call, you know, on the other hand, in a non-academic way, we call ourselves Jews all the way back to Abraham. Right? We don't say, oh, we say Abraham is the first Jew. We don't say he's the first Israelite. We don't say the first Hebrew. We could, but you also could say, which a lot of people do from the religious standpoint, he's the first Jew.
Yeah.
You see people say it all the time, right? And I don't mean just Orthodox. I mean, if you go to a Reform synagogue where they're doing a guy, the rabbi's talking about Abraham, he's going to say Abraham was the first Jew.
And a Catholic told me that last night.
He's the first Jew? Yeah, well, it's because we don't oftentimes use other terms like Hebrew or Israelite, but people used to, we just don't. Heck, we used to call Hebrews, we were calling them Hebrews until a generation ago in this country. Your dog tag would have said H for Hebrew.
Oh, really? Did in World War II. For me, it was Jew.
It's a generation ago, man. 2 generations ago. Yeah, your parents and grandparents would have had H on their dog tag. That's for real. The Reform movement was called the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, the UAHC. It changed its name to the URJ about 25 years ago to the Union of Reformed Judaism, but it was the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. So the Las Vegas Jewish newspaper was called the Las Vegas Israelite. What? Yes.
Why do they call it the high holiday?
Now you're asking another question out of the blue. I love that question though, Joanne.
Okay.
Why do they call them high holidays? It goes back to that cannabis question that you asked. No, it's not. It's not. It has nothing to do with that. But people are going to say that in the future. No, I think the issue, again, when did that term start to be used? It really started to be called, it's only in America. It's only in the United States where, and in actually English speaking countries where you would see that. Okay. So it was never called that term until a couple generations ago. It was because the holidays themselves had there was so little difference between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Passover or Sukkot or any of these other holidays. More Jews did not come to synagogue until a couple generations ago on Rosh Hashanah than they did for the other Hagim.
So that's why they call it the high.
So when they started billing it as the time that people would want to come, then those things came together. So you're talking about the late 1800s, early 1900s in America is when you first see that term. There's no equivalent term in Hebrew because we call them the Yamim Noraim. We call them the days of awe.
Right.
Or we call them, yeah, we use the term the days of awe.
That's what I was a kid.
Yeah. Or we call them the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of repentance. But high holidays, there's not even a Hebrew equivalent to that. It doesn't, it's just called it that. But it's for the purpose of understanding what we're talking about, which is what we tell people. Yeah, it's not my favorite phrase, but what?
The most important holiday is Shabbat.
Okay, I like that.
That's it. Some
So
people say I'm wrong. No, that's.
no one would say you're wrong.
They are.
They will say that they don't want to hear that, but doesn't mean you're wrong. you're not wrong, because the holiday that the Bible talks about the most is Shabbat.
It's Shabbat, but
So there's no question that it's the most frequent holiday. It's the most, Mike just said it, it's part of the Ten Commandments. It's the only one that's in the Ten Commandments. So there's no question of where of the preeminent holiday. But again, people, here's what I tell people. And again, it's partly because the average human, when they process this. So first of all, some people don't feel they're due a holiday every week, right? They just feel like that doesn't make sense. Whatever, I can tell you why, but some people say if you have a holiday every week, it's not, you don't think about it, right? If you have a holiday once a year, then it sticks out in your head and you look forward to it. There's a buildup, there's anticipation. There's anticipation for Shabbat if you take it to your heart too, but whatever, fine. I get it. There's a frequency issue. It's the same kind of equivalency that, again, of frequency. If you see somebody all the time, you take them for granted, and you see them once or twice a year, you don't take them for granted maybe as much. It's just the way the mind works. I don't want. You hear that. We hear that a lot. But it's not. It's the only way you could say that is the Torah calls it a Shabbat Shabbaton, a Sabbath of Sabbaths. But from the standpoint of holiness, the Bible doesn't say that. The Bible doesn't say it's the holiest day of the year. It says it's a Shabbat of Shabbats, which means you're really supposed to, on Shabbat, you're supposed to take it really seriously. And so if you maybe don't take every Shabbat seriously, take this one seriously. You're right, Joanne. It says Shabbat Shabbaton. If it's telling you that it's a Shabbat, that's nothing hard. No, it's not. That's the highest, right? So no, I'm fine. So the other thing about Shabbat is that if for people who don't want to think about it, right, if don't want to know or want to put it out of their minds that they're actually missing a holiday every week or not, because look, the reality is if some people are faced with this and they say, oh, Shabbat, I don't want to think about observing Shabbat every week. Because obviously some people that's an issue for them. I don't want to think about it. I'm better off not doing it at all. It's kind of like this all or nothing approach to Judaism, which some people have, which is not really good, but it's the same approach that some people have towards exercising or eating well or any of the other things that we're supposed to do, where they go, I can't be bothered. I'm not even going to think about it. So I can't do it. I can't do it right every day, so I'm not going to do it at all. I mean, people do that.
I learned from Robert the Biden. He said, do what you can do.
Yeah, but that's
And
what.
then one step more.
Yes, but that's the way you should also approach exercise.
Absolutely.
People who say, well, I can't exercise multiple times a week or can't, so then they don't do anything. So that's what happens. I'm not just saying, what I'm only saying is it's not just religion, it's other aspects of people's lives. Anyways, so that is a problem, is that people have that attitude towards anything. And so they have that attitude towards Shabbat too. But the thing about Shabbat that is interesting is that for people who want to wrap their heads around coming to synagogue 2 or 3 times a year, then it fits that purpose, that fits that thing where I'll observe Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I'll observe Hanukkah, and I'll observe high holidays. High holidays, Passover, and Hanukkah. I'll do those 3 holidays. I don't know if people ever consciously say that, by the way. I don't know if anybody ever sits back and goes, I'm going to think about Jewish things 3 times a year, or Jewish holidays 3 times a year, observance 3 times a year. The rest of the year, I don't really want to think about it. So what I've told people before is, well, it seems like a lot of people had that idea back in the biblical period because we read about the Shalosh Regalim, Sukkot, Passover, and Shavuot 3 times a year when people would come with their harvest and they would make the offerings. We just read about it in chapter 16. Just read about it in the Torah. It was in Deuteronomy. It was in Leviticus. Whole list of holidays. The Leviticus list has also the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and also the list in the book of Numbers has the sacrifices that we offer at those. So these books of the Bibles have it. 3 books of the Bibles have the list of holidays. And clearly, the ones that were in Deuteronomy are the ones that people come to with their offerings when they're harvesting. Now, we would make the argument today that if people celebrate 3 times a year as Jews, if they do Passover or from the beginning of the year, if they do high holidays, Hanukkah and Passover, they're doing roughly seasonal holidays. They're doing seasonal holidays. They're doing a fall holiday, they're doing a winter holiday, and they're doing a spring holiday. They're not really doing a summer holiday, but they're doing fall, winter, and spring. Now, here's the weird thing. So it means it's like almost quarterly. The weird thing is that in our day, and it's a perfect time to have this discussion, so I don't mind having this discussion now because it's one of the things that we think about this time of year. I think about it, you thought about it, and I'm telling you. If people do that 3 times a year now, what's interesting about it is that they're actually forcing themselves to think about it in a more conscious level than I think even our ancestors did. I know that's weird for me to say. And I'm not like going, hey, look at us, we're so wonderful that we do this. But I want to tell you something. Because to some extent, our lives are so disconnected from the natural yearly cycle, especially in California, where we only have 1 season. The reality is that our ancestors had their holidays tied in with their economic survival and their food. Like we almost have to consciously say, oh, well, I'll celebrate Passover because I like Passover, because my family gets together for Passover, because we do a Seder, because I know we're supposed to do something, because my ancestors have been celebrating Passover for thousands and thousands of years. But as far as it connected to my everyday regular life, it really isn't. So I'm not saying, hey, look at us, aren't we wonderful that we're doing this? I don't mean it like that. But I do want to tell you that there is something interesting about it, in that we also have that challenge of being 3 times a year Jews, as we say, but also that to some extent, it's more disconnected from our lives, which is not a good thing. I wish the holidays were tied more to our lives today. I don't really know how to do that, because when in reality, not only do we not have harvests anymore, Mike, almost every aspect of our life has become disconnected from a fixed time, in the sense that everybody used to know that April 15th was tax day.
That's right.
Everybody knew it.
Yeah.
Nowadays, first of all, it's not April 15th anymore. It's some random day. I don't even know what date it is, but it's some day in April when it's close to that date, but a couple of days later, and the post office is open and whatever. I don't know what date it is. Do you? I don't know what date it is this year coming up.
I know you're gonna play 2 years within 6 months.
But so many people are on extensions, and so many people are on other kinds of crazy things that day isn't the same anymore, right? It doesn't have the same feeling like you used to see people lined up at the post office and getting their things stamped. And it was like almost like a ritual. No ritual. Election day. People send in their ballots. They do this. Who knows when elections are?
We actually got this check, and the line at the bank was out the door.
Correct.
Not anymore.
So everybody's on their own schedule now. School. When does school start? I don't know when school starts. It was right after Labor Day. I have no idea when school starts. No idea. Someday, I don't know. You don't know. That district starts that day. That district, even in Santa Clarita, we have 5 districts. They all start different days.
Yep.
So you don't even know. And so these cultural shared experiences that we had as Americans, they're gone. So we really don't have that much, which I would say, again, is part of the problem of how do we make Judaism part of our lives and part of the organic function of our lives. We don't have it anymore. And it's not part of our, we have to step out of our lives in order to be Jewish. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. Judaism was always an integral, organic part of a person's life. Our ancestors didn't have to figure out when Sukkot was, because their whole lives were rotating. I'm talking about when they lived in a shtetl, when they didn't even have the harvest anymore, when they weren't thinking about that. They knew when a lulav and etrog had to come out because they knew the schedule, because that was the way they lived their lives. Shabbos wasn't, and you see it in Fiddler on the Roof. It wasn't because Shabbos was like, oh, I want to celebrate Shabbos today. Everyone in your village shut down on Shabbos. You were a freak if you didn't celebrate Shabbos. They'd kick you out of the village if you didn't celebrate Shabbos. It wasn't, you didn't have to think about it. Nobody thought about it. Nobody said, hey, I want to celebrate. You want to celebrate Shabbos? You want to get a challah this week? Nobody thought about it. So the fact that we have to think about these things now, the fact that we actually have to step out of our lives for a minute to do that is very, very different than the way it was for most of the last couple thousand years. I know that's weird for you to think about, but understand that if you were a Jew in Spain, if you were a Jew in Poland, if you were a Jew in Greece, it didn't matter. Your life was totally rotated around that, even if you didn't live for most of Jewish history in Israel.
But you could, as far, for history as far back as the 1920s, that was like that. In Brooklyn, where my dad
In
grew up.
Jewish areas, in Jewish enclaves, it was like that too. It was like that for about 30 years, 40, almost 30 years of Jewish existence in America. But once we moved to the suburbs, it was over. Once we were now no longer part of an enclave. It got a little harder in America because there was not you didn't have Shabbos off anymore. Like, you had to work in a factory and you had to do your stuff, and people made accommodations. But yeah, you're right. If your neighbor, if the other person in the tenement, everyone in your tenement flat was there, they were all celebrating Shabbos, it was easy.
But
You didn't
like
think
my
about
mother
it.
said when California, LA area, they weren't Orthodox anymore. It was too hard.
And not only was it too hard, they now had to think about it.
Yeah, yeah.
You and I say, well, it's too hard to get a challah or whatever. Who cares?
No.
You buy a challah. I'm just saying, it's not a challah. It's the fact that you actually have to think about it. You didn't have to think about it. So I'm not making an excuse. I'm not saying, hey, look at us for doing the right thing and it's harder. I'm not saying that. I know like people are going to say that I said that. It's not what I'm saying. I'm just stating a fact that our ancestors didn't have to think about it. Nobody said, oh,
Part of what?
we're going to synagogue for high holidays. Where are we going for high holidays? They didn't call it high holidays. It's just, where are you going? It's Rosh Hashanah. What are we doing? We're going with our family. They would look at you going, what do you mean? What are we doing? We don't have a choice. We're not going to not be there.
It's interesting because I don't know if it was a leaving, but I wish I knew the date. I still have too much stuff. But I'm reading, and this goes way back to when the king couldn't decide whether to be Christian or Muslim or Jewish, and he.
Yeah, you're talking about the Khazars. You're talking about the Khazars. Yeah.
And
So John's asking about the Khazars.
it's hard being a Jew.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
God gave us the Torah, and I'm not asking for anything in return. And our job, and I'll come back and I'll take a picture, I'll forward it to you. And the king decided, you know what, I like that.
Yeah. So the king of the Khazars, it is. The truth is so the king of the Khazars converted to Judaism. And you're absolutely right. It is Ibn Ezra who wrote the Khazars, the tract on the Khazars. It's a somewhat adapted story of how the king of the Khazars became Jewish, and he has a disputation between a Christian, a Muslim, and a Jew, all arguing about which is the better religion, and he chooses Judaism. So it's set up as a dialectical discourse about why one religion's better than the other. So it was based on a real experience, and Ibn Ezra kind of
But the rabbi never said it was a rabbi, it wasn't a Halili. Now it's coming back. He didn't say it's better. He said, this is it. This is my religion, right? This is the religion of Abraham, Isaac, and Sarah, and I promise you nothing in return. I promise you no reward. There's no, this is our religion, and it's not easy. I'll send it to you, and that's why it's survived through all the destruction, the temple destructions. It survived through all these years, through all the pogroms, through the Holocaust, through everything. And so it's interesting you say that, and which gets right back to where we're talking about being remote, right? To me, it means correctly. I don't know about you guys, but when people said, listen, why do I have to schlep to Jerusalem? Why can't I have a rabbi or a priest, whatever it was at the time, right? I'm not an expert. Why can't we do it locally, right? And that was
yeah, but that was first though. That's the thing.
Yes, I understand. But I'm
That
just
that
saying,
was the
it
first.
survived, right? It survived that, and it survived that, and it survived all these years.
So it goes through and
Right, like
it goes through and it adapts over time. So what is the next adaptation going to look like, John? That's a good question.
That's what we discussed.
That's what it's a good,
look like.
it's what
It
a
will
good
be
question. It will be, and it'll be woven into the fibers of the next generation because Jews have already taken a leadership on the technology. So that means that the technology is essentially, because it's essentially being created and the spearhead of it is, so to speak, are Jews. It's going to be there.
It's funny because I didn't think about this. I won't waste any more time on it because I wasn't reading this book 8 years, whenever I was president. And I wrote my appeal, right? I had to do my appeal in front of everybody at the Hyatt. And I remember, because this made sense to me about how the lighthouse and the guiding light, like the lighthouse is always on, it's always there, right? So when you're always when life is tough or whatever, the synagogue is always the guide. There's always the lighthouse. It's always the guiding light. It's always on, whether it's small or it's big like wood. It doesn't matter. Whatever your community has, right? So when you say that, that's just what I'm thinking. So it's interesting how now, these years later, it's kind of coming together.
Well, it's definitely here. So that's where it came from. But yes, well, you said something before you realized what it was that you said, but you said it. So yeah, you said it. But the reality is you said that before. But the other thing is that it does need to be more organically woven into our lives. That's the challenge. So the way that Israel has organically woven Judaism into the fabric of its national culture, it's succeeded. So Judaism will succeed there. How it succeeds in the diaspora is obviously up to us. It's up to those who are take it seriously and who want it to continue, but it has to be adapted organically. It has to be more of how we live our lives every day. Otherwise, it's too hard. It's too hard. It's too hard. It already is obviously too hard for a lot of people. And I don't mean it's like, well, it's not too hard for you. You're here, but if a fraction of people, so a fraction of people are identify even if they even want to identify Jewish, and then a fraction of those people want to be identified and affiliated with a congregation, right? And then a fraction of those people that identify with a congregation actually want to come into the synagogue regularly. So it's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. So the question then is, if that's what it's going to be, and by the way, like other religions have this challenge too. I'm say, this is Judaism. Judaism actually has an advantage over others because we actually have an ethnic component to this too, by the way. That's a topic for another time. But we have an ethnic component to it, which actually, and a family component to it, which makes it a little bit different. But without that, forget that. That's another issue. That's again, topic for another time. If a fraction of a fraction is doing that, that means that we need to figure out a way to capture the rest of the people who don't feel connected, which again means that they have to feel connected in their daily lives. That's where Judaism is falling short. And again, as I said, other religions are too, but we have to figure out how to weave that into our lives. So what did it do? It accelerated during COVID to speedily get to that point. So that's what our challenge is. Okay. So back to the tribes, back to the settlements, back to the Levites, which is where we started. So Levites are allowed to live in Jerusalem. Of course they are, because we don't want them to do their jobs outside of Jerusalem. It says he may serve in the name of God Adonai, like all his fellow Levites who are in attendance before Adonai. They shall receive equal shares of their dues without regard to personal gifts or patrimonies, which is a fancy way of saying what's due to their ancestry, because they're Levites, because of their avot, which again, you look at the, well, it says that's saying we don't really know what it means. We know what it means. It means they're due that because they are Levites. When you enter the land, oh, by the way, one thing that I will say about this, because I've said it before, Mike's heard me say this a dozen times, but I will say it now because it's important to say it, to remind people of it, and some of you have not heard me say it. We are not sure exactly why the Levites are given this distinction. Why do they get a portion of everybody's stuff? Why are they given no tribal portion? And the theory is that the Levites were added on to the Israelites at a certain point. Either they did have a common ancestry, they traced their ancestry back to Abraham, and when the Israelites were in the land of Israel and they wanted to have the Levites live amongst them, the agreement was they don't get a piece of land because we already have our territories, and instead we're going to give you a place to live on all the tribes, and we're going to give you the ability to be our priests. That theory is based on some clues that we have in the Torah. It is a theory. We don't have proof of it, but the theory goes even stronger than that, which is that the Levites under Moses and Aaron are really the people who came out of Egypt.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Talked about it many times. I'm saying it here now because this is one of the passages that seems to be telling us this is an agreement that we have, a contract that goes, we don't know why. It's a theory. What's it based on? The fact that we have no evidence that every Israelite came from Egypt at that time. It makes a lot more sense that it was a smaller group. It makes a lot more sense that it's the group that Moses and Aaron are a part of. It also makes sense that we have no archaeological evidence that Israel was conquered during this time. No archaeological evidence that during the time of Moses and Joshua, that people came in and burned the country down and took it over. There's no evidence for that. But it is very well possible that there were some battles that maybe Moses and the Levites came in and settled amongst the people.
So this theory would say that there were always Hebrews, Israelites, Jews in the land of Canaan all the time. So I thought, yeah.
It's a theory. It's not based on tradition, though there are some clues in the Torah itself.
Really?
We'll talk about them when we get to them in the other parts of the Bible. But one of the reasons why, again, there seems to be this special designation for the Levites is because, and again, the theory specifically that, and again, a lot of biblical scholars feel comfortable with it, because they don't like the idea that the story of the Exodus is made up. Believe it or not, there are a lot of rational, scientific, archaeologically minded people who still don't like the idea that that didn't happen. The problem is that historians, archaeologists say there is no evidence for it.
Isn't there evidence of something happening?
It's difficult to say whether it's even the Egyptians. We have no record that Egyptians, a group of people left Egypt as slaves and did a bunch of miracles and plagues hit them and that kind of stuff. We have no evidence from the Egyptians. But fine, let's say the Egyptians didn't want to talk about it. Whatever. Say they didn't talk about it. We forget. So let's not. But there's no evidence on the ground in the land of Israel that it happened. And because of that, then people have said, yeah, but wouldn't it make sense that this story really did happen, but maybe it didn't happen as many people, and maybe these people are the Levites who are given permission to live amongst the people, but are not going to be given a territory. That's why, again, we're not going to spend a lot of time on that because it's a theory. It's nothing but a theory, but it is an answer for why the Levites get to have this kind of stuff. So again, when you enter the land your God has given you, you shall not learn to imitate the abhorrent practices of those nations. Let no one be found among you who consigns a son or daughter to the fire, who is an augur, a soothsayer, diviner, or sorcerer. We read about this last week. One who casts spells, or one who consults ghosts or familiar spirits, or one who inquires of the dead. Anyone who does those things is abhorrent to Adonai. And it is because of those abhorrent things that your God Adonai is dispossessing them before you. So again, the Canaanites were bad and they deserve to lose their property. And by the way, just so you know, I was reading the Dennis Prager commentary on Deuteronomy the other day. And, he points out that one of the things that, as much as the Canaanites are bad, the Jews are held up to the same standard. They weren't supposed to do it, and you're not supposed to do it. And you will be held to the same punishments that they were, which is death. So lest you think that the Canaanites are bad people, they're going to be wiped out and they're inherently bad, anyone who behaves that way is going to be rooted out. Okay? You must be wholehearted with your God Adonai. Those nations that you're about to dispossess do indeed resort to soothsayers and augurs. To you, however, your God Adonai has not assigned the like. From among your own people, your God Adonai will raise up for you a prophet like myself. That is whom you shall heed. Now, here's the interesting thing. Last week, we talked about these things being bad, people doing, soothsaying and talking to the dead, consulting spirits, doing magic, casting spells, doing kinds of miraculous things. And God says, yeah, there will be people amongst us who will do these things, but they're like me. They're prophets. And those are the people you can listen to. Now, this opens up a problem, because how do you know that they're good? And here's how. This is just what you asked of your God at Adonai at Horeb on the day of the assembly, right, at Mount Sinai. You said, let me not hear the voice of God Adonai any longer, or see this wondrous fire anymore, lest I die. Whereupon Adonai said to me, they have done well speaking thus. I will raise up for them among their own people a prophet like yourself, in whose mouth I will put my words, and who will speak to them all I command. And anybody who fails to heed the words of the prophet speaks in my name, I myself will call them into account. And what's interesting about this, again, is we're told here, going to be like you, Moses. Now, again, if this is written hundreds of years after Moses, it really doesn't matter, because it's definitely opening it up to the fact that there will be prophets during this period of time. And we've been reading about them in our Tuesday morning classes, because we've been reading Isaiah, and we've been reading about Jeremiah, and now we're reading about Ezekiel, who are prophets who were doing things that God told them to do, saying things that God told them to say. Of course, we read about earlier prophets like Samuel, like Elijah. These are prophets that do amazing things and that do kind of mini miracles, if you will. And they also speak God's words. Interesting. Prophet. Interesting that the King James translation. What? You're paying attention to the capitalization. Interesting, because does that say anything about Jesus later on? And you can understand why this is what is on their mind, because watch what happens here.
This also kind of points that it was written in a prophet's time.
Correct. Correct. At a time when prophecy was very much part of the world.
Right.
Well, here's what they got to do. But any prophet who presumes to speak in my name, an oracle that I did not command to be uttered, or one who speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. Well, that's pretty strong. That prophet is going to die. If they tell you things that I didn't say, or if they talk in another name, in the name of another God, you put them to death. And should you ask yourselves, how can we know that the oracle was not spoken by Adonai? It's a fair question to ask. It's why the Torah asks it rhetorically. If the prophet speaks in the name of Adonai and the oracle does not come true, that oracle was not spoken by Adonai. The prophet has uttered it presumptuously. Do not stand in dread of that person. By the way, horrible place to put a break. Because you're going to say, well, wait, that can't be the end of the discussion. It isn't, because what we have been introduced to is this issue of prophecy and who gets to be a prophet. Now, we know one thing: they can't speak in the name of another God. And they also have to have things that they say are going to happen, they have to come true. Now, here's the problem. How long has to happen? How much time has to pass? How much time can pass before that prophecy comes true? So if a prophet says something was just open-ended, and of course, this begs the question, if a prophet said something and you have to wait years and years for it to come true, that whole time he can't be a prophet. What he said hasn't come true. So until it comes true, he's not a prophet. Now, you can also imagine that the prophecy has to be something pretty bold. Because if the prophecy is that, this time next year, we're going to have a heavily contested election, no one's going to say, oh my gosh, that guy's a prophet.
How are we identifying? I've read it again.
Yes.
Anybody, any man walking down the street finding his phone.
So again, he has to speak in behalf of God. So you have to check that, right?
I go down the street and find
Okay, so he has to be speaking in the name of God. That's a foregone conclusion nowadays, because if somebody said they're speaking in the name of Zeus, no one would pay attention to him. Back then, Zeus had a lot of followers. So we won on that one, John. You got to speak in the name of God. But again, the person they have to say something's going to happen, and then it has to happen. But it obviously has to, they didn't say here, but it has to be something that you would not assume would happen. It has to be something that you'd be going, oh, wow, there's no way that guy could have known that. So we've seen some of those prophecies happen on our Tuesday class. If you're not with us on Tuesday, I'll have to tell you, but you should come. That's right. As Sheldon said, you should come. But we've seen what happens in that Isaiah told King Hezekiah, this is what's going to happen. He told Jeremiah would tell King Jeconiah or King Zedekiah what was going to happen.
Wait. How'd they get an audience with that?
So what we would have to assume is that people got a reputation, right? So in order to get in front of the king, you had to have a reputation. what's interesting is that Isaiah, Jeremiah, not so much Ezekiel's, as we haven't really seen it yet, but take my word for it. Ezekiel is prophesizing outside the land of Israel. Isaiah and Jeremiah both are inner circle people. Isaiah and Jeremiah, as we've seen, Isaiah was related to the royal family. Jeremiah's father and brothers, we read about these guys. They're Baruch, his scribe, they're all part of the inner circle. They're all around the king. So what's interesting, John, is that the guys that we read about, at least so far, some of them we're going to read later, they were already a part of the inner circle.
Kings and the priests were.
They were related.
all part of the same.
Well, those guys are, not all of them, but I'm saying some of the people, at least the people we've read about so far, they had inside track. These people were all be like saying, well, they all went to Harvard. They were all at Stanford. They were all working in DC already. They were Kennedys. They were people who already people knew. So that's the difference. So these people were inside people. Jeremiah, at least the guys we've been reading about, they're not all like that. They're not all like that. But the people we've read so far on Tuesdays, those are inner circle people. So I think probably they had to get a reputation right. They had to develop a reputation, especially people who were not inner circle. But some of these people, they were already there. Everybody knew them already. What?
It says, how can we know? I should have read that. See the discussion in chapter 13, Jeremiah. In his confrontation with the self-styled prophet, I can't pronounce it, Hananiah,
Yeah.
predicted the death of the latter. Self-styled Hananiah, and indeed Hananiah died that year, Jeremiah 28. But such ready proof of inauthenticity, and you know what I'm saying, was rarely at hand. The Torah distinguished between two types of false prophets. One, who thought, being italicized, he spoke in God's name. The other, who deliberately prophesied in the name of false gods. Chapter 13 deals with the latter, the ones who deliberately prophesied. The text above with the former. It deals with the latter, and the text above with the former. So that's interesting. So you're right. They had to have a rep.
Now, here's the issue for one of the most deeply discussed and fraught with problems questions. What does this have to do with, does this have anything to tell us about Jesus and the way he was treated by the Jews of his time? That is based on a discussion which, first of all, I think is a difficult discussion to have without having the historical evidence in front of us. And I'm saying that because not only does it not exist, to say that it exists and we haven't found it might also be a false, that might be a false statement. We even have that discussion because people want us to weigh in on whether, and I'm saying we, mean Jews, they want us to weigh in on whether Jesus was a prophet or not. If he's defined as a prophet, that means we have to concede that yes, he is a prophet, and therefore do the things that he say qualify as prophetic statements. Most of what Jesus says in the Christian Bible, from my vantage point, don't qualify as prophecy. I don't think they were intended as prophecy. He didn't speak that much. He spoke in some prophecies, but that wasn't the majority of the teachings. Even ones that could be kind of loosely classified as prophecies are more teachings rather than I think, than prophecies. When Jesus says the meek shall inherit the earth, I don't believe that's a prophecy. That's a hope and a statement of what God would like to see happen. It's not Hananiah is going to die next week. One of his most famous prophecies, what I think is why this is an issue, is that he foretold that the temple would be destroyed, which it was about 30 years later. Is that close enough from his time to say that he was a prophet? Well, it would be he might have been 60 or 70 by the time that would have happened. So if he could have lived out his life, he could have seen it. Would it have served the purpose of establishing himself as a prophet? I don't think so. Would we have said he was a prophet if that had happened? Probably not. From the standpoint of it's 30 years later. I think for a prophet to be saying something and it happens, it can't be when 30 years later, because we're going to come back to Jesus when he's 65 goes, you were right. What about for the last 30 years? No one listened to me? It defeats the purpose of a prophet. If a prophet's going to say something that's going to happen, it maybe a year, maybe 2 years. That's what it seems like in the Isaiah prophecies. That's what it seems like in Jeremiah's prophecies. 5 years, 4 years, he's talking about the destruction of the temple in his day. He's talking about what's going to happen when people are going to eat their kids. I mean, it's horrible prophecy, but it happened, and it happened a few years later. So I don't think a prophet would say normally, hey, I'm going to tell you something that's going to happen 30 years from now. Take my word for it. I don't think they did that. So I don't think it's a fair question to ask. And I don't think most of what would be considered Jesus's work was prophecy. So I don't think it's a fair question to ask. And that's why I don't think most people from an academic point of view, and I'm not talking about Jews, I'm talking about Christians, say Jesus was a prophet. Jesus was a rabbi, Jesus was a teacher. So classifying him as a prophet is a weird thing, but I hear people ask it all the time. And like Jews will say, somebody says, well, do you believe in Jesus? And they'll say, well, I believe Jesus was a prophet. I don't know. I don't say that. I don't say that. But some people feel like if I say that, it's kind of a compromise, and I can say, well, Jesus was a really good guy, or he had powers, but he didn't have those kind of powers. So that's why this becomes an issue. But I don't believe it qualifies under the Deuteronomy lines, and I don't think that Jesus would have been punished for being a false prophet. So and Jews got involved in that discussion too, not least of which was because Christians would come to them and say, you executed Jesus because he was a false prophet. It's not true. It didn't happen. I don't think that, first of all, it's not even in the Christian Bible that Jews accused him of being a false prophet. They accused him of blasphemy. They accused him of saying that he was God, but that doesn't qualify really as prophecy. I don't think so. But again, it is a legitimate issue, and it's one that people do get confronted with, and they're talking about this line in Deuteronomy about a false prophet. So I don't think it's a fair question. I don't think after reading this many times, after reading the Christian Bible many times, I don't think it's a fair question. And most Christian academics won't say it either. They don't say Jesus was qualified as a prophet or was considered a prophet, or they said that's his job. You see books come out today about Rabbi Jesus or Jesus but it's not Jesus the prophet. Part of the polemic got more complicated because in about the 7th century, when Islam started, they considered Jesus a prophet. And so they called him a prophet, which to some extent also put the onus on Jews to say, well, was he a prophet or not? Muslims think he's a prophet. Is he a prophet or not? Because they think he's a prophet. So John the Baptist was, according to some Christians, was the last prophet. Jesus is not a prophet, and therefore shouldn't be classified or shouldn't be held up as a prophet. I will just tell you, it's not every Christian is taught that. Not every Christian throws that question at us, but it is sometimes thrown at us. And again, I'm just telling you where it comes from. And it comes from this, because it comes from this punishment. What?
Pastor really said John the Baptist was the last prophet, Jesus wasn't the prophet. Amazing how many times that morning class comes up with that.
Yeah, I'm only telling you, it's just been an issue for 2,000 years where Jews get confronted with that question. And again, it's not even, to some extent, it's not even, but some Jews accepted it. I mean, some Jews said, fine, he's a prophet, just leave us alone. First of all, there's no real downside to saying it. It's not like somebody said, well, he's a prophet. Was he a prophet? Sure, he was a prophet. Will you leave me alone now? I mean, I don't think there was there was not a real tension in saying that. right? There was no consequence to saying that. So, but again, it gets back to this issue, which is the prophet shall die. And I'm just telling you, that's not what happened with Jesus. Jesus was not executed for false prophecy. Just wasn't. All right. When God Adonai has cut down the nations whose land your God Adonai is assigning to you, and you have dispossessed them and settled in their towns and homes, you shall set aside 3 cities. This again, random. It's coming back in here. You see, it's not really kind of makes sense and why we go back to these cities of refuge. You set aside 3 cities in the land that your God Adonai has given you to possess. You shall survey the distances and divide into 3 parts of the territory of the country that your God Adonai has allotted to you, so that any man who has killed someone may have a place to flee to. Again, by accident, unintentionally, they killed somebody. They go to this city, one of these cities. Now, this is the case of the killer who may flee there and live, one who has slain another unwittingly without having been an enemy in the past. Right? There's no premeditation. For instance, this is an example. It says, this is, what's your translation say, Mary? Yeah.
As when a man goeth into.
Yes. So as, what does yours say, Glory, for 5? Yes. So it's a for instance. Yeah, the word va'asher is essentially when, or, but no, but, so get another translation. Get the Jewish. Okay. For instance, a man goes with a fellow into a grove to cut wood, and as his hand swings the axe to cut down a tree, the axe head flies off the handle and strikes the other so that he dies. That man shall flee to one of these cities and live. Now, this is just one example. It doesn't only have to be axe gone wrong situations, right? This is as this situation. So this is an accident. Person is clearly responsible for the death. There's no question that if that person hadn't had the axe go back in his hands and hit that, and it flew back and hit that guy, he's responsible for it. Okay.
So we went from prophet.
Yeah. To unintentional
to
death.
manslaughter?
Oh yeah. And we're going to change again in a second. Again, it's not, I have no answer. I told you, there is no answer for why these laws are placed the way they are. There's not even a logic to how we got from one to the other.
And it's okay with God that I commit manslaughter and I leave the scene.
You don't flee the scene. It's not fleeing the scene. It's that you, otherwise, when the distance is great, the blood avenger pursuing the killer in hot anger may overtake him and strike him down, yet he did not incur the death penalty since he has never been the other's enemy. That is why I command you to set aside these 3 cities. So the reason is that in the ancient world, if you killed somebody, it was incumbent, killed my cousin or my brother or my father, it was incumbent on me to hunt you down and kill you. That is my job. So your job now as an unintentionally killing somebody is to get to the city of refuge as fast as you can before I kill you. Why? Because that was the way things were done. The Torah came up with a solution to stop non-premeditated murder from creating a cycle of death that.
Dungeons back then, no?
Yeah, but who's going to maintain them? Well, you have to have a king who's powerful enough, who has the facilities to hold these kind of people. Didn't do it. Nobody did it. John, we didn't do it. Nobody did it. We didn't do it. America didn't do it.
Go to a
What?
tour of the fort with the spikes and the.
No, that was our family.
Oh,
That was in Germany.
oh my God.
So more museum of torture. Yeah, no, listen, there were punishments for people. The Bible has lashes as a punishment. But for murder, it's a problem because the situation in normally throughout the Middle East and in other cultures was that it was incumbent on the family to kill the person who was responsible for their other family member's death. So the only way to break this cycle is to have a place where people can live where they have to stay there, but at least they don't get killed. And the cities have to be in a place. This is before rabbis. Before the people, when they have this situation, what this does is it allows people to find a place quick enough so that they can get there and they can be safe. So the cities have to be spread out across the country so that people can get there quick enough. So they're only 20, 25, 30 miles away. So they have to be not just, can't all be put in the same area. They have to be spread across the country. So
Go.
can you imagine you're running for your life to get to a sanctuary, place of sanctuary. And until you were there, you could be taken out. So the cities were there. When God Adonai enlarges your territory as was sworn to your fathers and gives you all the land that was promised to be given to your fathers, and again, that means the areas that are outside the land of Israel in modern day Jordan and modern day Syria, right? If you get those other territories, the greater land of Israel, which in those days was not the land of Israel, it was the land of Jordan and Syria too, all the way to the Euphrates River. If you faithfully observe all this instruction that I enjoined upon you this day, right? Asher, right? Asher Anochi mitzavcha hayom, which we read all the time. And you love God, ahava, right? Ve'ahavta. And you lalechet, right? Lalechet b'drachav, and walk in God's ways at all times. Then you get 3 more cities to those 3. So you have 6 cities. Now, the Bible told us in the book of Numbers that we have 6 cities, by the way. 3 cities in the land of Israel and 3 cities outside. So we already knew that. But it's almost as if the Bible is telling us here in Deuteronomy something that we didn't read in the last book of the Bible, which is one of the reasons why we think this book was meant to be read without that book of the Bible, that God did give us 3 other cities outside the land of Israel. Because God, wanted us to be able to have cities of refuge in the other parts of the territory that we have now. So it's an explanation for why we have it. This is during the time of the 12 tribes.
But these cities were outside of
The land of Israel. But remember, Gad, Reuben, and half tribe of Manasseh are living on the other side of the Jordan River. The book of Numbers tells us that we had that territory even then. And if we look at what the Bible says, several places, we get that territory if we behave well. And that territory, during the time of the tribes, during the time of King David and King Solomon, was under our control. We lived there too. As I mentioned to you before, the Jordan River was never, even in the Roman period, even in the Crusader period, even in the Turkish period, the Jordan River was never a national boundary. It never was a national boundary. It's a fact. Look it up. That land, the land of Judea, the land of the whatever, was always, there were always countries that were on both sides of that Jordan River. It never functioned as a natural boundary. I don't know. I mean, a lot of reasons for that, but it never did. Thus, the blood of the innocent will not be shed, bringing blood guilt upon you in the land that your God Adonai is allotting to you. If, however, a man who is the enemy of another lies in wait and sets upon the victim and strikes a fatal blow, and then flees to one of these towns, the elders of his town shall have him brought back from there and shall hand him over to the blood avenger to be put to death. You must show him no pity. Thus you will purge Israel of the blood of the innocent, and it will go well with you.
now this.
So this is specifically saying, if somebody goes to one of those cities and it was premeditated, you turn him over back to the people who he killed, and they kill him.
This dovetails, because we discussed this last week, where there had been witnesses.
Yes. Yes. Now, what's interesting about this is that not only would there be witnesses, but the guy ran away, and he's now pissing off everybody by the fact that he's trying to say that he didn't kill the guy intentionally. So if it can be proved that he killed the guy intentionally, right? If it's like, what are you talking about? It wasn't an accident, right? For whatever reason, I mean, you make up your, use your mind. The guy took the guy's girlfriend, right? And he hates the guy. He has motive. Guy messed him up in business. Kills him. He has the motive, has the opportunity. There's even witnesses. The guy's like, the family's like, you didn't kill him accidentally. And they go into that city of refuge. City of refuge isn't a get out of jail free card. It's not, we don't have extradition. No, you can walk right into that city, say, this guy, we have witnesses. We know for a fact that he killed this guy premeditatively. You take him away. So the Torah is actually telling us, sorry. It's not a free, like, oh, sorry. We have crazy rules like that in this country. These double jeopardy laws, right? Which are there for a reason. They're so that you don't keep trying somebody over and over again for the same crime. But we have genetic DNA evidence that proves that somebody committed a crime, and we can't try the person again. That's ridiculous. The Torah isn't like that. The Torah doesn't do that. The Torah doesn't say, sorry, he's in a free city. Yeah, we wish we could do something, but he's here now. The Torah doesn't work like that. Bless you. The Torah says the guy committed murder, doesn't matter. He's going to be held accountable. And the Torah does tell you, it says, don't show him pity. Now that sounds kind of harsh. I know. Don't show him pity.
Yeah, but 14 and 15, I'm not reading forward here. But we did discuss this. I don't know if it was the Wednesday night class or the Tuesday morning class.
It was Wednesday.
So, but
It was last week. So here's what it says. So what John's saying, you shall not move your neighbor's landmark set up by previous generations in the property that will be allotted to you in the land that your God Adonai is going to give you to possess. Where'd that come from? That has nothing to do with any of this. This is about not messing up your borders. Okay, makes sense. It's good law. Where'd it come from? The next law, as John says, goes with the previous law and the previous stuff that we read last week. A single witness may not validate against an accused party any guilt or blame for any offense that may be committed. A case can only be valid on the testimony of two witnesses or more, which we actually, again, kind of read last week in chapter 17. So it's reminding us that for all these situations, we need to have witnesses, which also, of course, means that there's a very high level of, the burden of proof is very high. And one would say that, again, we can't convict on circumstantial evidence, or at least we can't punish on circumstantial evidence. Let me put it that way. Because there could still be punishments for people that we deem guilty. You could say, hey, nobody saw him do it, but we're not going to we can't execute somebody without witnesses, but they could still punish people. If I'll give you an example. If you stole something from somebody and they found, and there's examples of this in the Talmud, you find the cloak, this guy gets his cloak stolen. They find the cloak in the guy's house. Nobody saw him take the cloak, but it's this guy's cloak. It's got his ID on it, whatever. Everybody knows it's his cloak. Say the guy stole it. And nobody saw him do it. You can still punish the guy. The guy can still be fined because he has the guy's cloak. But you can't kill the guy. You can't punish the guy with a whipping, but you could definitely fine the guy. So it's not like there's no punishment if they don't have witnesses. You did it.
and I read it.
Took it home, huh?
Yeah, it got a call.
Somebody saw it. Oh no. So we,
Because they got my coat.
His name was in his.
It was the leather jacket and they looked the same. And the guy's phone was in.
oh no, that's a tough one. Well, it's a tough one. But yeah, you can,
Didn't get fined.
you can well, that was definitely committing it unintentionally. But yeah, look, you can't, correct,
I guess we find out what that.
correct. But the reality is that you have to have witnesses, and there were definitely cases. There's even an argument. Did anyone ever get executed for witchcraft, for example? I don't know. You'd have to have witnesses. The person would have to admit to it. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things almost that would have to happen for the person to be executed. We don't know how often, if ever, people got executed for witchcraft.
But some people did.
Maybe, but we don't know for sure.
I
Not,
was
not in biblical period.
No, I was saying in Massachusetts, I'm not happy.
No, but in Massachusetts, yes, people were definitely executed for witchcraft.
I was there.
Right.
I'm a witch.
So,
Whatever.
but we don't know, the Bible doesn't really tell us, or the Talmud doesn't really tell us if people got executed for witchcraft. If someone appears against another party to testify maliciously and gives incriminating yet false testimony, the two parties into the dispute shall appear before Adonai, before the priests or magistrates in authority at the time, and the magistrate shall make a thorough investigation. If the one who testified is a false witness, having testified falsely against a fellow Israelite, you shall do to the one who has schemed to do to the other. Thus you will sweep evil out of your midst. Others will hear and be afraid. And such evil things will not be done in your midst. And there is definitely, we heard this last week, there's definitely an understanding that doing these things publicly, doing these things with everyone knowing what's happening, will scare people from doing it.
So obviously, if it's written like this, it's so detailed, then this happened.
Unless it's there to scare people from doing it. That's the argument that's sometimes made. I don't, look, my gut tells me they did punish people. Like my gut tells me that they did punish people for witchcraft. But yeah, but the Talmud tells us that people did not get executed very often. In the discussion, the Mishnaic discussion is that, according to the rabbis, a court that executes people every 7 years is considered a hanging court. And then Rabbi Akiva said a court that executes someone every 70 years is a hanging court. So there's definitely an understanding that you do not execute people a lot. And Rabbi Akiva lives around 150 of the Common Era. So we don't know. And again, a question, by the time Rabbi Akiva is writing this, the Romans are in charge anyways. So how much power did the Jews have of enforcing these kinds of laws? Difficult to say, but there is definitely an understanding that courts are not supposed to execute people a lot. But hopefully they'll be scared and they'll feel that there is going to be a punishment. Look, if people are not afraid that they're going to be arrested and charged and serve time, there is no question that they will commit more crimes.
Well, maybe.
You know how we know that? Look outside right now. Watch the news. Watch smash and grab robberies that we're now trying to figure out how we're going to deal with them now. That's what happens.
You know, they had that formal prison system. So this was a way to try to avoid.
Absolutely.
having to establish that. Tax the people even more than they were already taxed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is no way of doing anything other than doing this. And we're going to get to that when we get to the laws of war, which are also based on, well, what are your alternatives? Because you're either going to kill the people or you're going to come up with a solution for doing this. So again, by our standards, some of these things sound pretty tough, but as the Torah tells us, nor must you show pity, for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. hand for hand, foot for foot. That is the law of lex talionis.
So
To
that's repeated from Exodus.
correct.
So which is the one which is the more popular line?
Definitely the one from Exodus is the more well-known because people don't like this little addition, which is not in the original one. Nor must you show pity. Below tachos inecha. Right? So this phrase, don't show pity, people don't like that because it sounds pretty tough. Now, again, it's not based on the fact that people shouldn't have pity. It's just when you're dealing with justice, there really is no room for pity when it comes to implementing justice. That doesn't mean you don't show compassion or you try to come up with a law that's going to be fair or one that's going to, not cause people to, to essentially go against the law because they're too afraid of being caught. All those things are embedded in this, but when you're administering law, you cannot do that because, again, as somebody who spent lots of time with convicted felons, I can tell you, there's a time to show compassion and pity for them, which is oftentimes what I got to do, but not when you're in court with them. Because as much as we would show pity to people and compassion to people who've committed crimes and we want them to be rehabilitated, we definitely don't want them to live without hope or without a purpose. The reality is that there's nothing we can do to make up for the pain and the loss that they committed in this world without punishing them. Because how else do we make up for the victim? And I've spent a lot of time with victims too. So that's the purpose of justice, is to try to give some type of balance and some type of help to the victims.
One good thing about this, that we have much more explanations. This is really an explanation.
You're talking about in the text or in the commentary?
Commentary.
Well, that just depends on the comment, why there's more commentary. I would also say that Deuteronomy has actually a little bit of explanation, which the other books don't. With the understanding that if Deuteronomy was written after, people have said, well, we better have some clarification for it, including, by the way, this tiny little clarification, which is, if you're telling me eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, that's clearly not showing pity. That's not about showing pity. Guess what? I'll admit that. And it's almost as if the text is saying, yeah, that has nothing to do with pity. This isn't about pity. Take pity. It's not the time for it. Right now, we're trying to tell you how you're going to administer a law. And administer a law right now is to do this. Our job and the court is to try to find justice for the victim here. How do we try to fix almost something that's unfixable? And how do we root out injustice? And how do we create a situation where our citizens aren't afraid? You kind of have to not go into it with creating pity. Again, that's not the job of the person who runs the prison. It's not the job of the person who's the chaplain who's visiting with the inmates. That's a different job. When I did that job, my job was to be with the inmates and try to help them feel, compassion and try to find their humanity. But that's not my job if I was the judge.
Did you get gratification out of that?
I got a lot of gratification out of it. But I never stopped thinking about the victims of the people that who were responsible for it. And sometimes that influenced my decisions. So, if one of the people asked for a letter from me telling the parole board that they were fine, sometimes I felt that that person deserved another chance. But sometimes I wouldn't, even if I liked the person, even if I felt they were, had a redeeming quality that, you know, I wanted to foster. So that person's going to be a threat when they're back out on the streets. I wouldn't write it. So it did affect what I did, but not in the, you know, again, for the most part, that wasn't my job. By the way, I could have made a very simple argument, which is I'm never going to write a letter on behalf of or do anything on behalf of an inmate, which I wasn't asked a lot, but if I was, I definitely thought about my role as also not my role, but my life saying, hey, would I want this person on the outside? So, yeah, it was about 7 years. But I will tell you that there was a lot of satisfaction out of doing it because, look, if religion helps us and we're doing okay, hey, look, you know, it's making our lives better. But look, to me, it's like the front line of spirituality. If this stuff works, it works for people who have everything taken away and can still find something out of it, then that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where it's like in the front line, like saying, oh, well, we're going to take it to the place where again, it's the hardest world. We're going to take spirituality to that place, see if it works. So pretty amazing. Now, this is the part we're going to finish with today. This section, chapter 20. Doesn't necessarily, on the face of it, have anything to do with what we read before. But again, that's not our issue. We're not trying to I can't figure it out. Nobody can figure it out. Never seen anybody say, here, this is why this law comes next. When you, parentheses, an Israelite warrior, because this is somebody definitely going to war, take the field against your enemies and see horses and chariots, forces larger than yours, have no fear of them. For your God Adonai, who brought you from the land of Egypt, is with you. Before you join battle, the priest shall come forward and address the troops. So, reminding you, when you go to war, right, God is with you. So you don't have to worry. And on top of that, this is the God who took you out of Egypt, reminding us that God helped us fight the most powerful army in the world at that time. And we beat them. So any other army you're going to face is not going to be as powerful as the Egyptians. Of course, until we get to the Babylonians and the Persians, who are more powerful. But up until that time, the Egyptians were the most powerful, and God destroyed them. So when you go to battle, the priest is going to be part of that battle. He's going to come forward and address the troops. And he says, shall say to them, hear, O Israel, right? Shema Yisrael, right here. You are about to join battle with your enemy. Let not your courage falter. Don't be afraid, right? Not be in fear or in panic or in dread of them. And those are three different things that are listed. Don't be in fear, al tira or al tira'u in this case. Lo tapezu, which is translated as don't be in panic, and lo taratsu, don't be in dread of them. So all of those things emphasized, juxtaposed, those three different ways of being afraid. Do you have any notes on that, Glory, on yours? On verse 3? Well, that's a nice way of translating it. Much more descriptive. What about Mary? What is yours? How does yours translate those three words? Well, that's the way they translate. Let not your courage falter. That's the first part. So, yeah, I mean, if you look at it that way, well, here they translated in 3 sentences, but yeah, let your courage not falter is a separate one. Don't be in fear, panic, or in dread. But those are all the ones that are listed out like that. Again, for it's God Adonai who marches with you to do battle against your enemy, right? To bring you victory. So God is with you. You're not supposed to be afraid. Okay? Keep that in mind. Don't be afraid because God is with you. Okay? Yeah, Mike's already smiling.
Why?
Because he knows what's going to happen. Then the officials shall address the troops as follows. Is there anyone who has built a new house but has not dedicated it? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and another dedicated it. So, right? If he was working on his house, let him go back. It's not fair for someone else to finish it up. Is there anyone who, well, somebody else, meaning like he only partly built out the house and now somebody else is coming in and gets it and gets to claim it. Is there anyone who has planted a vineyard but has never harvested it? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and another harvest it. Is there anyone who has paid the bride price for a wife, but who has not yet taken her into his household? Let him go back to his home, lest he die in battle and another take her into his household as his wife. So 3 things: your house, your farm, or your wife. If you're in any status where you haven't closed the deal, so to speak, you're allowed to do it, which by the way tells us that there was a waiting period between paying your bride price and getting your marriage consummated, right? So it tells us that there was actually, could be some time in between, right? Shouldn't surprise us that there was time, but look, if a war broke out during that time, it could happen. So it'd be very unfair for somebody to have become engaged to somebody and then they go off in battle and they die. But it happens. It happened. Happened in Vietnam, it happened in Korea, it happened a lot in World War II, where people had a they had a woman that they were married to or they had a child with, and they never got to see that child because they were killed in battle. So there are many thousands of stories of people who never met their real biological father. Sometimes you wonder how many people would have found out with DNA that their father that they thought was not really their father if we had a DNA test 50 years ago, 60 years ago. Well, we did. We didn't have, they weren't stuff that you could buy and send in and get done in a couple of weeks. But if people had had those in the 50s and 60s, can you imagine what would have happened? Because there are thousands of people who never got to meet their biological father. They were killed in battle. And again, some cases, everybody knew it. The family kept it secret and everybody went along with it. Sometimes people did find out later on that their dad was not their dad, that their dad was, killed in battle. But it happened. So, especially once we started being able to send people overseas and all kinds of stuff, that things like that happened. It's kind of crazy to think about how often it happened. Yeah, anyways. So you don't have to fight if that's the situation. Gosh, can you imagine how many people would have been taken out of war in the last wars if that was the case? I mean, thousands of people would have not been able.
They get married right after the war. Before he was supposed to get out, he got moved up on land.
Yeah. So it's weird to think how many people that would have affected. My dad didn't see his dad until he was 2. His dad didn't get back from World War II until he was 2. So he never saw his dad. So my dad was born
Kind of like
when his dad was on. Yeah.
DJ the war and his wife has the baby. He had never met him.
Yeah, it happens. What am I talking about? I always used to think about that when I was a kid. Be like, your dad comes home and you like say to your dad, "Hey, Dad, I've never seen you. 2 years old." But my dad didn't remember it. I'm like, you remember? You walk up to your dad and go, "Hi, Dad." Like crazy, but people just did it. They didn't think about it. So yeah, but I'm just saying, I mean, I had a great relationship with my grandfather, but the weird thing is that people just did it and they didn't think about it. They didn't moan about it. They didn't complain about it. I never heard them ever moan about it. They just did it. I always thought to myself when I was a dad too, I was like, what if I didn't see my kids for one of my kids for the first 2 years of their lives? Be like, that'd be impossible. I couldn't even think about that.
I don't think we are.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, it's weird. Anyways, yeah, I mean, these are all things that disqualify somebody from going into battle.
That would disqualify half the people.
Look, when we started coming up with deferments for people, right? You know, we said, well, if they're in university or if they're in, if they have a brother who's already serving, all these kind of.
Why his brother didn't have to go to work.
Yeah. Yeah, the Saving Private Ryan. So,
Actually, if you're married, for example, then it went to the point where you had a child.
so we started doing this in the United States. We came up with, but we only could do that when we weren't fighting a war where we said we need every able-bodied person to do it. So the Torah basically sets the precedent for this, which is pretty wild that Israel has this rule. And Israel nowadays has similar rules for deferment. Oh yeah. And of course, as you know, I don't need to tell you that, especially if you're, it's, what are you talking about? They let people who are studying Torah out. Doesn't say anywhere here about Torah, but they include that because they say that those people who are studying Torah are doing the work of God. But I mean, it doesn't say that here. So that's a big issue in Israel. But what's interesting is that you create a culture like Israel has had for the first 75 years, where if you don't serve in the military, it actually is considered to be like there's something wrong that you didn't serve in the military.
Actually, right? Jerusalem Post says that that's one of the main issues going on with judicial reform, of who's behind judicial reform, in order to keep it the way it is.
You mean to keep the people not having to serve in the military? Yeah. It's going to reach, I don't know if it'll cause a civil war, but it's definitely reaching a breaking point where people are going to say, you got to come up with a solution, because you can't have, it was like we've mentioned it before, when there were a few thousand people studying yeshiva, no one cared. But when there's 500,000 people studying yeshiva, people are starting going, dude, how many people need to study Torah? How many people need to be praying for us? We need at least as many people actually serving.
So how long?
2 years.
Did you actually? They call you back.
Oh, they call you back in reserves for 25 more years. You're part of the Miluim, you're part of the reserves. But again, the point of, like, Israel never wanted to rely on reserve units. They wanted to have an active military. And up until now, Israel still had a situation where if you want to be a part of society, you have to serve in the military. Now we have in Israel more people that are asking for other kinds of deferments that have nothing to do with religion. They actually don't want to serve in the military. But the reality is that in order for you to be part of like any kind of group of friends, people would be like, who are you? You didn't serve in the military? And it was considered to be such a weird thing that people would not, you wouldn't do it because you were kind of a pariah if you didn't serve in the military. And it's still the case for the most part. And even more so, it's like, if you miss that experience of serving in the military, you're almost missing out on like what be equivalents in this country. Like you didn't go to college, or you didn't do this thing, or you didn't participate in some thing that people do, which I'd say in America, it's usually going to college, but be like, how did you not do that? And it's not because you had to, it's because you opted out of doing it. So I would also argue that it's the best way for people to network is through their military. And it's still the case that most of the people who become really, really successful tech folk and innovation people are learning how to do these kinds of things in the military. So Israel has the way to perpetuate this. They just don't like this issue of people that are taking advantage of the system. And
That why they always have women
in the military, well,
they're not.
well, first of all, yes, women always serve. Now there's more women that are taking deferment, but there's still a lot of women. The majority of women who can are still serving. They only have to do a year, a little over a year. I think it's like 15 months now. They only have to do a little over a year. Maybe it's 18 months. But yeah, I mean, it's part of what they do as well. So the normal situation is people finish school, they go in the military, they travel for a year after they're done with the military, and then they go to college. Part of the experience of their lives. This is the way they do their lives. And everybody knows that that's what they do. So look, if somebody's not going to follow that trajectory, and let's say they go to yeshiva, that's their trajectory. That's all they ever were going to do. They didn't like say, hey, should I go in the military or should I go in yeshiva? There was no question where this person was going to go. There was no question where that person was going to go. They were raised in those communities. The issue is that the person who goes to yeshiva is probably never going to get a good education. And so they're never going to go to university and they're never going to be successful. They're not going to come up with the next ways. They're not going to come up with some biotech thing. They're not going to be a drone entrepreneur. They're never going to be wealthy and they don't care. You could make the argument that they're taking themselves out of the ability to be wealthy as well. I mean, in all fairness, I'm not going to use that argument. I don't live there. So I wouldn't look at a person with a straight face and say, well, what do you care? They're never going to be a millionaire. But you could say that. You could say that. But whatever. Look, it's a big issue. And it is, as John said, it's one of the issues that's actually underneath the whole discussion about the judicial reform. Because the justices are the ones who've upheld that they can't get away with this. And so taking the judges out will allow the Knesset to protect it's not a good situation. I think they have to figure out a way to get everyone to do national service. That's my take on it, but whatever.
You don't have to be a combatant.
Correct.
You can-
Correct. You can,
Plenty of ways to serve.
correct. And it should be, but it should also be in our country too, John. So before we start lecturing Israelis on how they should take care of their system, we should do a better job of our system too. So, but this is the great part. The officials, and this is what Mike was laughing about. The officials shall go addressing the troops saying, is there anyone afraid or disheartened? Let him go back to his home, lest the courage of his comrades flag like his, which is a fancy translation of saying, or not a fancy translation, because that's the translation has something to do with courage or their heart. Mary, what does your translation say? Lest his courage. Yep. Lavav. There, it's the word. Yimas et lavav. That his heart will flag. What does your translation say? Glory? That's a good translation because it has the word heart in it as well.
So my notes say, let him go back. The mission saw this as a command. He had to go back for his anxiety would prove infectious. And that's true. We had issues with that when I served. Also, most men in such positions would be too embarrassed to exercise their option. Can you imagine? You're ready, you're all ready to go. They do the Shema, and the guy said, you know, that's a Larry David thing.
Yep. Yeah, right. Yeah. I think I need to be somewhere else. Yeah. The point is, after telling people from the very beginning, don't be afraid, right? Don't be disheartened. Don't be like every way you could possibly say it. I'm still afraid. The Bible says, you remember, don't be afraid because we beat the Egyptians. God's with you. God's with you. You beat the Egyptians. Don't be disheartened. And the people are still disheartened. And that's the thing that's so amazing is that even after hearing this pep talk, that people still say, I'm afraid. And again, the Bible actually says so. The Deuteronomy has the commentary right here because it says, because otherwise it will be infectious. The other people will also start becoming disheartened because that feeling of fear will spread.
But this law is not anywhere else.
It's not in the laws of war are not in the other books. We have the laws of war here in Kitetse in this section. We do not have this in other sections of the Bible. So this section right here that begins here in chapter 20 and will go into the other chapters that we read are the first place we learn about it. Maimonides has an entire commentary on the war, on the laws of war. What's so weird is that he wrote it during the Middle Ages when there was no Jewish army, but he still kind of said, hey, if we ever have an army again, you better know what the rules are. And so he has commentaries on this and explanations on this. But this law is the most famous, which is if the person doesn't have courage, it's going to spread amongst the troops. And it's much better to get it out. Much better, much better. No. But for people who are being called into battle, they're being called into battle because they've got to go to war. There's no choice in the matter. This isn't, hey, let's have an army so that we can be ready, on guard when the war happens. We're going off to battle. Even in that situation, get those people out. Do not let them be part of the troops. There's a very famous story in the Bible that we read for those who were with us on Tuesdays. We read it in the book of Judges. It's the story of Gideon. Gideon goes into battle against the Canaanites, and he has 30,000 troops. 30,000 soldiers, already a small fraction of the soldiers. According to the Bible, Gideon looks out at the troops and basically says, it's too many. We don't need that many. God kind of, says, send most of them home. And he does this thing where they have to go down to the water, how they lap the water up, whether they use their hands or whether they just go face first into the water. That's how Gideon, he gets rid of 2/3 of them. So only 10,000 soldiers go into battle. To some extent to show that, look, God doesn't need a big army because there's God. God didn't need us. We're there almost to help, like in support role for God. So, there's something to be said for the way we fight in the Bible. It is real important for us to know that when we're fighting with God, the most important thing is the attitude and the message that we're going to have as a fighting unit together, because we're going to win. It's just a question of whether people are going to go in there with confidence, go in there with, because we see what happens when they don't. We saw what happened with the spies. We saw what happened, in other parts of the Bible for the last, especially in the book of Numbers, and the people don't have confidence. So it'll backfire. Even with God, it'll backfire. So what's the most important thing? Not how many people you have, but whether they're good quality and whether they're courageous. And so, it. We're seeing it right now. We're actually seeing it right now. When you read that, and I read it every day, every night, every morning. I wake up. First thing I do is I read what happened in Ukraine last night. And when you read those stories of, Russian troops that are defecting, or ones that just read some article about how they're selling out their comrades and getting out of the country and getting away. There's no question about it. Ukrainians are fighting for their land. They're fighting for their own country. if you're not really sure why you're there, you could have Russia had a pretty good army a couple of years ago. As far as on the world stage, they were a top 10 army. Not anymore. Who knows what's going to be left by the time this war is over? But if you don't have courage, if you don't have faith in your government, if you don't have faith in why you're fighting, better not be there. And you're seeing it firsthand.
But in America, that, when we had the draft, it was the draft, you had to be there. I mean, look what happened to Muhammad Ali or Cassius Clay.
And look what happened when we had a draft and we took 10 times as many people to World War II than we did in Vietnam, when we had a draft for a war that people didn't believe in, tore our country apart. So the lack of faith in the war, the lack of faith in what people were doing, caused more damage than the war itself. You could make the argument, it's been made not by me, but by people much smarter about political science than I did, that was the real tragedy of Vietnam, was what it did to our country, not what it did to Vietnam. I mean, it did do damage to Vietnam, but that's not what we paid the price for. So think about that. We've seen it on our own lives. We're seeing it right now. If people don't have courage, if they don't have faith in what they're doing, they're doomed. And it's sad because you know what's happening. By the way, you know what just happened today? Today. The Armenians pulled out of Nagorno-Karabakh today. Today, Azerbaijan just took over that last part of Nagorno-Karabakh today. Today. It's over. That war is over. It was going on for 20 years. It's over.
This was the reason for the 40 years.
Yes.
In the desert.
This is the reason for 40 years in the desert. Lack of courage, lack of faith.
But no, what gets me is that you're talking about, if you're fighting for something like World War II, that you really believe it. You would think everybody would believe what they're fighting for, their land in, Canaan and Israel type thing, and they didn't. Obviously, because that was written.
Yes. Well, I will say one thing. You're right? Well, based on what we read in the Torah, they didn't have confidence, right? That's why they had 40 years in the wilderness. It's difficult to know whether they felt this way against the Canaanites, because as I told you, we have no evidence that the battle ever took place. Any of these battles took place. But more importantly, when this was written, in any situation, during the time of Jeremiah, during the time of King Josiah, there was a Jewish army. The question is, did the people believe in their government? Did they believe that they were fighting for God? Did they believe? So whenever it was written, there was always that issue, though.
Right.
But with the Canaanites, it's difficult for us to know because we just don't have evidence that it ever happened. Because you're right. You'd think, well, what are you talking about? We're fighting for the land promised to us. We don't know. We can't tell you this.
We know we didn't destroy them all like we were supposed to.
And we know that for sure, right? We do know that. That's for sure. The Bible tells us that we didn't destroy them all. So it didn't happen. So no matter what, it didn't happen. But we do know from our own history that when you're fighting for your own land, you're going to win. Which is what happened in the land of Israel in 1948. And that's why men and women fighting together
And what happened in the 6 Day War?
defeated an army that was much more powerful than they were. So, did people who read this, who were reading this, let's say, in 1948, did they think about that? That's a bigger question, Mike. Because you know what? I don't think anyone said, I'm going home.
No.
Because if they went home and didn't want to fight, they were basically saying the Arabs are going to be sitting in our house.
Right.
Which, by the way, begs another question. Why was there nothing on the other side?
Didn't fight. I mean,
But why did those other places, why were they not able to fight?
they didn't think anything of it. I don't think they ever had-
I'm just gonna tell you something. If you're an Arab that lived in Israel in 1948, there are 5 other countries you can go to, which many of them did after the war. There's no other country that we're going to go to if you're a Jew. I guess you could have said, I have a cousin in America. If we lose, I'm gonna go to America, but I don't think many people thought about it like that. Especially not the people who survived the Holocaust, who are like, who knows whether I'm ever gonna have another chance. All I know is, yeah. All I know is I shared with you a little bit that story of Golda that I shared on Friday night. I couldn't share you the whole text. The speech that Golda gave to the Chicago Jewish community, I couldn't read it without breaking. I mean, I shared you the one line that she said, we're not the best Jews. That line really showed. That speech that she gave, I'll share it with you. You can read it on your own because, gosh, when I read that speech about how she raised the money, it was unbelievable. I'll share. It's considered one of the greatest speeches. I mean, this is the speech from January 2nd, 1948. I mean, it's, to some extent, the War of Independence had already started, but this was the speech, you know. So I'll share this with people so they can. We have no alternative. We have no alternative but to fight. Some people are saying, no, just work out some peace treaty, you know, come up with something. But here's what she said. Says the issue is if these 700,000 Jews in Palestine can remain alive, then the Jewish people as such is alive. And Jewish independence is assured. If these 700,000 people are killed off, then for many centuries, we are through with this dream of a Jewish people and a Jewish homeland. So. I don't think so.
Long speech.
I don't think so. Well, it's not as long as you think, but he said, this is the line though. We are not a better breed. We are not the best Jews of the Jewish people. It so happened that we are there and you are here. I'm certain that if you were in Palestine and we were in the United States, you would be doing what we're doing there. And you would ask us here to do what you would ask us here to do what you will have to do. Yeah. So he said, I'm going to paraphrase what Churchill said. I'm not exaggerating to you when I say that the Yishuv, right, the Jews in Palestine, will fight in the Negev and we will fight in the Galilee, right? This is Churchill's, we'll fight on the beaches, right? And we will fight on the outskirts of Jerusalem until the very end. You cannot decide whether we should fight or not. We will. The Jewish community in Palestine will raise no white flag for the Mufti, for the leader of the Palestinians. That decision is taken. Nobody can change it. You can only decide one thing, whether we shall be victorious in this fight or whether the Mufti will be victorious. That decision American Jews can make. It has to be made quickly, within hours, within days. So yeah, this is the speech that she gave to the Chicago Jewish community. She gave similar speeches in other places as well. I'll post this up in the chat so you can read it in its entirety. And I definitely think it's should be read in its entirety. Every Jew should know, every American Jew should know this speech because it was one of the speeches that best spoke to what we did. I don't know if they'd understand it, honestly. I don't know. I know, but that's not the same thing, John. I don't know if they can understand. We're the last generation of Jews who can understand it because we looked in our parents' and grandparents' eyes and knew what kind of life they led, what it meant to be a Jew in the 1920s and even the 40s in this country, where people, would say, I'm not having you dirty Jew on my team.
Before that too.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about my dad as a kid being told, we're not going to have you dirty Jews on our team.
When the rabbi used to come to my father's home to teach from his mosque, they'd stone the rabbi.
I only dealt with anti-Semitism once.
What?
And, Marines.
Really?
Just once.
I very rarely dealt with it as a kid. I mean,
Oh,
I never.
I ran his ass, but I had to run with him. Ran, more. You went to Iran?
All right. All right, everybody. We want to say Gemar Chatima Tova. May you all be sealed in the book of life, and we don't see you online, or we'll see you in person, or again, we'll see you in the next year. Again. There's no live Friday night. There is a tape service though, with some new stuff in it. Oh my gosh, what could it be? It's going to be good. Yeah, there might be a Joe message from Joe. All right, everybody. Take care.